Acts 9, verse 1 to 9, Saul's conversion. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind, and did not eat or drink anything.
Off the top, I'd like to mention that Saul also goes by the name Paul in the New Testament. And the reason for that is Saul is a Jewish name, and Saul is a Jew. But he also goes by his Roman name, Paul. He was born in a city that gave him Roman citizenship. So when Paul is out and about in the Roman Empire, he often uses his Roman name. I wanted to mention that off the top because as I was preparing the sermon, I noticed that I started mixing the two names together. And I wanted you to be aware of the two names because if I do that during the sermon, when I deliver it today, I wanted you to know what I was talking about, who I was talking about. But by any name, Saul is absolutely passionate. He has fire in his belly for the things that he knows are true and the work that he thinks needs to be done. I think Saul, if he was around when the sentence was coined, would have agreed with the sentiment, lead, follow, or get out of the way. He views himself as a leader. And so here is Saul, ready to defend his religion, God's covenant people, from this new alleged prophet. Jesus of Nazareth and his followers were viewed by Saul as a threat to Saul personally, and a threat to the Jewish religion. And so Saul was going to do something about it. He came with authority from the chief priest to go to Damascus, as he had done in other places, other towns around Judea, to take prisoners and to bring them back for trial in Jerusalem. And he had already done this before in other towns and areas. And whenever somebody was on trial before the Sanhedrin, Saul would cast his vote against them, condemning them to whatever punishment it was that they faced as a follower of Jesus, as a follower of the way. And so with fire in his belly, here goes Saul on his way to Damascus. He is on a mission. He has these letters from the high priest to the synagogues in Damascus that he's going to locate and destroy the followers of Jesus Christ in Damascus. But on the way, Saul gets stopped in his tracks. There's a little bit of humorous irony here that Saul, on his way to arrest followers of Jesus, is himself arrested by Jesus as he's on his way to Damascus. Jesus comes and confronts Saul, and he arrests him in his tracks, and in some ways he even puts him in prison for 3 days. 3 days, something like solitary confinement, without sight, without food, without drink. But the question might be asked, was this really Jesus who confronted Saul? Or did he somehow misunderstand what he experienced? Was this really Jesus, risen from the dead, ascended and glorified, who came down and confronted Saul as he was on his way to Damascus? Well, there's certain things that can be confirmed of Saul's experience. Luke did his due diligence about interviewing people who saw and heard and experienced these things. And Saul's fellow travelers could indeed confirm that as they were traveling to Damascus, they saw this bright light from heaven. They saw Saul fall down to the ground. They heard a voice. They didn't catch all the words, but they heard this voice from heaven. And when the light disappeared, they helped Saul get up from the ground. Saul, who was blinded by that light. Saul's fellow travelers had to take Saul by the hand and lead him into Damascus, because on his own he wouldn't have made it. Saul was blinded by his encounter with Jesus. And nobody could argue that Saul was left unchanged by this encounter. At first, the Christians wondered if this was some sort of elaborate sting operation, that Saul pretended to have this encounter with Jesus so that he could get welcomed into their homes, into their meetings, so that he could get a good list of names of those who followed Jesus, so that he could get the addresses of where they hung out together, so that he could be all the more effective in arresting and capturing Jesus' followers. But that didn't last, did it? Saul never did turn around and report everything back to the chief priests. Never did Paul come back with handcuffs and arrest the people that he now met with and prayed with and worshipped with. So the question is, did Saul really meet Jesus? Did he meet God the Son? Did he meet the risen and ascended Lord on this road to Damascus? Well, the way that Saul met Jesus, or Jesus met with Saul, kind of fits with what we know about who God is. If we look through the Bible, there's several accounts where people see the God who dwells in unapproachable light. Perhaps you can think of Moses, who went up on Mount Sinai, leaving all the people of Israel behind, and Moses went up the mountain and met with God there. And as a result of that meeting with God, Moses' face was transformed. He became radiant with the reflected glory, the brilliance of God's light. Ezekiel had a similar experience. When the prophet Ezekiel from the Old Testament described his vision of God in the throne room, this is what he said. He said, "I saw what appeared to be from his waist up, he looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire. And that from there down he looked like fire, and a brilliant light surrounded him." For Ezekiel, that was his experience of seeing the brilliance of God who dwells alone in unapproachable light. Peter, James, and John, Jesus' disciples, most intimate disciples, got a taste of that glory when they went up on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus for a prayer retreat. As Jesus was praying, it gets recorded in Luke chapter 9, as Jesus was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. That same flash of light that Saul experienced on the road to Damascus, that arrested him in his tracks, that left Saul blinded. See, Jesus' glory as risen Lord, his glory as ascended King of Kings gets revealed in this brilliant flashing light that Saul encounters on the road to Damascus. And yet it's kind of a weird image, isn't it? It's almost as if you see Saul captured on the road to Damascus, captured in this beam of light that comes down from heaven, as if he was a fugitive who had been trapped by the spotlight on the nose of a helicopter and arrested in that light, unable to run, unable to hide, and just captured because the light was following him. and he had to surrender. That's a picture of Saul, captured by the light of Jesus Christ in the crosshairs of this blinding light that comes from heaven. But what does this weird meeting mean? What's the reaction that Saul has as a result of meeting Jesus in this weird way? Well, Saul's character doesn't change an awful lot. He's still that passionate person. He still has all of that energy that he's going to throw into all of his projects. But instead of being directed at persecuting Jesus and persecuting the followers of the way, now that Jesus has arrested Saul, the direction of all that energy, the direction of that passion is completely changed, redirected entirely. Jesus arrests Saul so that he's going to stop persecuting Jesus' followers. Jesus arrests Saul so that Saul is going to stop persecuting Jesus himself. Because Jesus identifies so closely with his followers that if Saul is persecuting his followers, then Saul is persecuting Jesus himself. And Jesus takes it personally. And as a result of this confrontation, of this encounter, this weird meeting on the road to Damascus, Saul gets a new assignment. He gets told to wait in the city of Damascus because you'll be told what to do. And if you read further on in chapter 9, you'll find how Ananias, one of Jesus' disciples, does indeed come with a message from the Lord to Saul, that he'll be told how much he must suffer for the name of Jesus. And for Saul, this is a turning point in his life. This is a key event that changes everything that Saul is about, everything that he holds most dear. And so as you read through the New Testament, as you read through the book of Acts, you'll hear that Saul tells this story 2 more times in the course of the events of his life recorded in the book of Acts. As you read through the letters that Saul sent to the various churches throughout the empire, where he planted churches or where he knows of churches that were planted, he refers back to this event, to this transformation. And he uses that to apply it to the lives of all who read his letters, all who encounter the gospel of Jesus Christ, who need to go through that same transformation, realignment, now that Jesus has died and been risen again. Because if Jesus died and he rose again, for Saul, everything changes. He writes that in the first letter that he wrote to the church in Corinth. He writes, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. You're still in your sins. But this meeting with the risen and ascended Lord confirms for Saul that Jesus has risen and that it changes everything. And as a result, all of Saul's passion, all of his energy is pointed in the right direction to build up the church of God, to give glory to Jesus himself, and to encourage other people to put their faith in Jesus and to become followers, disciples of Jesus Christ. Saul's mission in life is now to glorify Jesus and encourage others to become disciples of Jesus. It's a big transformation for Saul. The gospel calls for a radical reassessment and perhaps even realignment of our thinking and our behavior. And yet it's not always comfortable, is it? I mean, I can think of times when I was driving happily down the road at a really good clip, confident that I was headed the right direction, when a child or my wife said, Dad, you do know we're going the wrong way, don't you? It's uncomfortable to have to realize that you're headed at a good clip the wrong direction and have to do a 3 or 5 or 17-point turn to get realigned on the road and start heading the other direction. But once you are turned around, once you are headed the right direction, you can go confidently. That was Saul's experience. Once he connected with Jesus, Saul was off to the races. He was determined that he was going to do everything he could so that others could hear the gospel of Jesus Christ and put their faith in him. Maybe this is a point in our lives when we have time to pause and assess the direction of our life. I don't know, some people have had a lot of downtime because of the pandemic. Some people have compared the call to stay at home to an experience of house arrest. They can't go out and about to their usual activities. They've had more room for thinking and assessing and fooling around with different things, but also time to think. Of course, it's not the same for everyone. I hear from some people that their routine hasn't changed all that much because of the pandemic, because of the state of emergency. They've still been just as busy. Some people even busier. But it is kind of an opportunity, isn't it? For us to evaluate the direction and the purpose of our life. It gives us pause to think when we hear in the news of somebody our age, whether it's somebody over 70 or somebody under 20 or somebody somewhere in between, when somebody our age has the experience of contracting this illness, of getting really, really sick from it and hospitalized, or perhaps even dying from this illness, it makes you think. It makes you ask some of the big questions of life of, what's this all about anyhow? And am I headed for the right goals? As a pastor, I find it a real privilege to be privy to that conversation when people are pondering, evaluating these big questions of life. What's it all about anyways? What really happens if we get sick? If we die? These are big things. And of course, not everybody gets arrested in this brilliant flash of light the way that Saul does. In fact, you can look through the whole New Testament and you'll find that Saul is the only one with this kind of experience. But there are reasons for us and for other people to pause and reassess, reflect on our lives. Where am I headed? Why am I going this way? And if we hear this gospel, and we hear about Jesus' death and resurrection, and if that makes everything change, do we need then to reassess, to change our direction and what we're doing? And how would you measure that anyhow? What kind of a compass would you use to set your direction? For Saul, it was this meeting with the risen Lord. This encounter on the road with the ascended Jesus Christ in all of his majesty and all of his glory in this unapproachable light made Saul sit for 3 days, hungry and thirsty and blind, and think it all over. Reassess what he thinks about Jesus and his death. And did he really rise anyhow? And so for Saul, that compass becomes the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It becomes what Jesus Christ has said and done. His mission in life gets aligned with Jesus' mission in life to proclaim the kingdom of God has come. Jesus is victorious. Jesus reigns. And so in the New Testament, we find that compass in life. Hebrews chapter 12 puts it this way: let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. The whole story is there in a sentence. that Jesus went to the cross on your behalf. He bore your shame. And in his death, he took the punishment that we deserve for our sin. And then, rising from the dead, assuring us of our resurrection and our salvation, Jesus ascended into glory at the right hand of the throne of God. This past Thursday, we got to celebrate Jesus' ascension, being reminded of the way that Jesus rose into heaven as his disciples were watching. And then it kind of makes sense that it's from heaven that Jesus appears then to Saul, arresting him, having this meeting with Saul, to realign Saul's life to what Jesus Christ has done in his death, his resurrection, and his ascension into glory. This meeting convinces Saul of God's mercy, of God's forgiveness through Jesus Christ. That is Jesus who makes people holy. That is Jesus who makes people radiant. So that that glory of Jesus shines in the face of Jesus' followers. This is a new direction for Paul. That he goes out with that same energy and same passion with which he used to persecute Jesus and his followers. Now he proclaims Jesus' resurrection. Hope, new life for everybody who hears and believes in Jesus' death and resurrection. As followers of Jesus Christ, we kind of have that same calling, that same responsibility to go out and to make new disciples in Jesus' name. As a congregation, we put that into words, saying that our mission is to reach the community of Tillsonburg and surrounding area for Christ by helping all to meet Jesus. The members of council recently recommitted themselves to praying every single day that we can be faithful in reaching the community of Tillsonburg and surrounding area for Christ, helping everyone to meet Jesus. And we'd like to invite you to have that same prayer, that we can be faithful to reach the community of Jesus, the community of Tillsonburg and surrounding area for Christ. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we keep these worship services going on YouTube and through Rogers Cable. We could all watch other videos and other worship services. There's lots of them out there, and some of them are really, really good. Better than what we can produce in our own congregation, in our own room here. But we feel called that we are the people, we are the congregation that's called to bring this good news to the community of Tillsonburg and surrounding area, to make disciples for Jesus in this neighborhood. And so we continue to connect together through phone calls and through letters and through Zoom meetings and other things like that, building each other up, keeping on making more and new and better disciples. That's also why we have our Alpha program starting this evening. An opportunity to proclaim and discover Jesus in his death and resurrection. A chance to ask the big questions of life so that we can align our lives with who Jesus is and what he's done. If you are interested in asking some of those big questions, there's room for you to participate in the Alpha program that we're starting this evening. 7:30 to about 8:30 this evening. We'll be meeting by Zoom. You're welcome. Because each of us needs to ask some of these big questions, and this seems a good time to reassess, to reevaluate. If you have met Jesus personally, if the reality of his death and resurrection comes home to you anew, how does that affect the direction of your life? How does that affect the way you express your energy and your passion? How you do what you're getting most excited about? Are you running your race with your eyes fixed firmly on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith? Does this encounter with the risen and glorified Jesus redirect your passion? Because if Jesus really died and rose for you, and that's what I believe, that's what we believe, does anything else in your life need to change?